The door clicked shut behind me, and I heard the lock engage. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet final sound that made my stomach drop straight through the floor of the most expensive office I'd ever stood in. "Sit down, Marin." His voice was calm. That was the worst part. Men who are truly angry don't raise their voice. I learned that too late. I sat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, so I folded them in my lap and pressed hard until the knuckles went white. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittered like it had no idea what was happening in this room, 42 floors above Michigan Avenue. I remember thinking, stupidly, that the view was beautiful, that I would probably never see it again. How had I gotten here? That's the question I keep asking myself, even now, even after everything. 6 weeks ago, I was nobody, or close enough to it. My name is Marin Ellis, and I was 28 years old, recently separated and waitressing 4 nights a week at Harlow's, a restaurant in River North that pretended to be more exclusive than it was. The menu had French words on it. The lighting was dim enough to make everyone look better looking. The tips were decent, which was the only reason I stayed. My daughter, Rosie, had just turned 5. She had her father's stubbornness and my dark hair, and absolutely no patience for anyone who moved too slowly, which made her both exhausting and the funniest person I'd ever met. She went to kindergarten 3 blocks from our apartment in Logan Square. She liked dinosaurs, hated socks, and had recently declared that macaroni and cheese was too babyish, and demanded I learn to make risotto. I was learning to make risotto. That was my life. Small and tired and mine, and I was fine with it. I was learning to be fine with it. Then Harlow's got a new reservation in my section on a Thursday night, and everything went sideways. The table had been set for 1. That was unusual for a Thursday. Harlow's drew couples, groups, work dinners. A single party in a 6-top booth usually meant someone had money and didn't feel like explaining themselves. My manager, Kevin, found me before I could head over. He had the expression he reserved for health inspectors and walk-ins who didn't understand the wait list. "Table 9, he said. "Carter Group. Take good care of them." "Just one person," I said. "Take very good care of him," Kevin said and walked away. His name was Sullivan Carter. I didn't know that yet when I approached the table, only that he was sitting with his back to the wall the way certain men always do, that he was younger than I'd expected, maybe early to mid-30s, and that the 2 men at the bar who were definitely not there for cocktails kept glancing at him every 12 seconds. I know it was 12 seconds. I counted later, when I was trying to make sense of everything. "Good evening," I said. "Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up slowly. Not the way people look up when they're distracted. The way people look up when they've been waiting for something, and they're not sure yet if this is it. His eyes were gray, not blue-gray or silver-gray, just gray, like lake water before a storm. "Water," he said, "and whatever you'd recommend." I went through the specials on autopilot, the way you do when you've said the same 12 sentences 400 times. He watched me the whole time, not in the way that makes your skin crawl, in the way that makes you wonder what you said wrong. "The duck," I said. "Chef's been making it the same way for 8 years. That's either a red flag or a good sign, depending on how you look at it." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "I'll trust your judgment," he said. I went back to the kitchen and told myself it was nothing, just a man eating dinner. I had 6 other tables. By the time the night ended, Sullivan Carter had been at table 9 for 3 hours. He conducted what appeared to be 4 separate meetings, men coming and going, sitting across from him for 20 minutes at a stretch before leaving. He barely touched the duck. He tipped me $400 on a $200 bill. I tried to give it back. I walked out to the valet stand where his car, a matte black Suburban with tinted windows, was still idling, and held out the cash and told the man standing beside it that there had been a mistake. The man looked at the money. He looked at me. "Mr. Carter doesn't make mistakes," he said. I took the money home and stared at it for an hour before hiding it in the coffee can above the refrigerator, where I kept my emergency fund. I told myself I'd figure out what to do with it later. The next morning, Rosie's kindergarten teacher emailed to let me know the class field trip to the Shed Aquarium would require a permission slip and a $40 deposit by Friday. I kept the money. The following Thursday, Sullivan Carter was back at table 9. Kevin intercepted me again. "Took good care of him last time," he said. His voice had the quality of a man passing on information he'd received from somewhere above his pay grade. I brought water without being asked. I recommended the salmon. He ordered it and didn't touch it. And the two men at the bar cycled through in shifts this time, like they'd worked out a schedule. At the end of the night, the tip was $600. There was a note on the receipt, written in small, careful handwriting. The recommendation was right. I was wrong about the duck. That was all. I don't know what I expect: a phone number, an invitation, some kind of next move. Instead, just that, an admission, quiet and precise, from a man who didn't seem like the kind who admitted things easily. He came back the week after, and the week after that. By the 5th week, I knew his order before he sat down. I knew which of the rotating roster of men he met with made him tense his jaw, and which ones made him lean back in his chair. I knew he drank water all night and switched to bourbon exactly once, always at the end, always the same pour. I didn't know anything else about him. I'd looked him up after the 3rd visit. Sullivan Carter, according to the internet, was the CEO of Carter Meridian Group, a private equity and real estate firm headquartered in the Hancock Building. He'd rebuilt it from near collapse after his father died 5 years ago. There were photos of him at charity galas and groundbreakings, always at the edge of the frame, always looking like he'd rather be somewhere else. There were also 3 articles from a financial blog I'd never heard of that made references to federal investigations into Carter Meridian's commercial lending division, to ties with organized labor disputes that may or may not have been settled in ways that weren't entirely by the book, to a lawsuit from a former partner that had been settled quietly and sealed. I read all of it twice. Then I closed the laptop and went to check on Rosie, who had fallen asleep with a plastic triceratops in her hand and looked so peaceful that the whole world felt manageable. I told myself Sullivan Carter was just a customer. Rosie's father, my ex, Danny, called the next morning asking if he could push his visitation weekend, again. This would be the 3rd time in 2 months. Rosie had already told her best friend at school that Daddy was very busy, in the tone of a 5-year-old who had absorbed an adult's explanation and made peace with it in a way that broke my heart. I said fine. I always said fine. Then I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor for a few minutes before getting up to make her breakfast. That afternoon, a car arrived at my building. Not a delivery car, a Suburban, matte black, idling at the curb. The driver handed me a thick envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter of credit from Carter Meridian Group for 1 year of paid music classes. The Arts Center 2 miles away, Rosie's music school. The one I'd looked at in September and put the brochure away because it was $90 a month, and Rosie had just been diagnosed with mild asthma, and I'd needed to recalculate everything. I stood on the sidewalk in November wind and stared at the letter until my eyes watered. Then I went inside and called the Arts Center and asked if a payment had come through for Rosalind Ellis. It had. Paid in full, effective immediately. I should have called and refused it, I know that. I know how it reads now, looking back, that every small yes is part of a pattern you don't see until you're 42 floors up with a locked door behind you. But I thought about Rosie's face. That was all. I thought about her face, and I kept the music classes. The week after, I arrived at Harlow's for my Thursday shift to find a note from Kevin. Table 9 had requested me by name, and they'd be arriving at 7. Not he'd be arriving, they'd. Sullivan Carter came in with a woman who turned out to be his attorney. They spent 45 minutes going through documents I wasn't supposed to see. Then she left, and he sat alone with his bourbon, and when I came to clear the table, he said, without looking up, "She likes music, your daughter." I went very still. "The brochure was in your bag," he said. "3 weeks ago. It fell out when you were clearing the table, I noticed." I didn't say anything. "I overstepped," he said, and now he looked at me. "If you want me to stop, I'll stop." The strangest part was that I believed him. Not because powerful men usually keep their word, but because there was something in the way he said it, flat and even, like a fact, that felt true. "Don't stop," I said. "I don't know where it came from." "The music classes. She started Monday. She loves it." He nodded once, like a closing argument. 2 weeks later, I came home to find Danny's car parked in front of my building, and Danny leaning against it with the expression he used when he wanted something. His name was Daniel Merritt, and he had been charming enough at 23 that I'd missed the parts that mattered. The way he always had a reason for why things weren't his fault. The way generosity came in bursts that were really about being seen as generous. He wanted money. He usually did, by the end of things. He'd gotten into something, he said. A situation with some guys he knew. He needed $5,000 by the end of the week, or things were going to get complicated. I told him I didn't have $5,000. He looked at Rosie's window, the light on in her room. "You've got more than you used to," he said. "Nice music school. Heard that's not cheap." I don't know how he knew. I didn't ask. I told him to leave. He left. But the way he left, slow, like he was deciding something, stayed with me all night. I didn't sleep. The next Thursday at Harlow's, I was distracted enough that I dropped a water glass in the kitchen and cut my hand on the cleanup. I wrapped it with a bar rag and kept working. Sullivan Carter noticed when I set down his water, the rag, the too careful way I was using my right hand. "What happened?" "Nothing," I said. "Broken glass, occupational hazard." He didn't say anything else that night, but when I brought the check, his hand closed briefly around my wrist. Not hard, just a stop, a pause. "You didn't sleep," he said. It wasn't a question. I looked at him. I thought about Danny in the parking lot, about the look he'd given Rosie's window. "Someone came to see me," I said. "An old problem." Sullivan Carter's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Does this problem have a name?" I shouldn't have told him, I know that. I told him anyway. 3 days later, Danny signed over full legal custody of Rosie without a single phone call to me first. I got a copy in the mail from a family law attorney I'd never heard of. Everything notarized, completely legitimate. I stood in my kitchen reading it 3 times. Danny didn't call. He didn't explain, he just disappeared, which was what Danny had always been best at. I knew who had made it happen. I sent Sullivan Carter a text from the number Kevin had quietly passed me weeks earlier. A back channel I'd never used. It said, "You shouldn't have done that," he replied in under a minute. "He was going to use her against you. I don't allow that." I stood there with my phone, and I felt 2 things at the same time, grateful in a way that scared me, and afraid in a way I couldn't name yet, the kind of fear that comes not from danger, but from realizing how deep the water already is. I called him. "Have dinner with me," he said before I could speak. Not a question, not quite a demand. Something in between. The way everything with him existed is in the space between. I said yes. The dinners happened the way the Thursday visits had, gradually, and then all at once. Always private. Always somewhere he controlled. A room at the back of a restaurant that was technically open to the public, but where the front table was always his people. A penthouse club in the West Loop, where the elevator required a key card. Once, a catered meal in the boardroom of his office building, at 8 in the evening when the floors were empty. He talked, more than I expected, about the city, about architecture, about the time he spent 3 months in Copenhagen when he was 19, and came back convinced that Americans didn't know what good bread was. He asked about Rosie constantly. Not in the way people ask about children when they're trying to seem interested, but the way you ask about someone you've started to think about. He never talked about his business. I never asked. I told myself I wasn't in danger. I told myself Sullivan Carter was complicated but not criminal, powerful but not predatory. I told myself the information on that financial blog was speculation, and federal investigations didn't mean anything until they meant something. I was lying to myself. I knew it then. I know it more clearly now. The night everything broke open started like a normal Thursday. I was halfway through my shift at Harlow's when a man sat down at the bar and ordered a club soda. He was in his late 40s, plain clothes, the kind of face that was designed to be forgotten. He nursed the club soda for 40 minutes and then moved to a table near my section, just as the dinner rush thinned out. When I came to take his order, he showed me a badge. "Special Agent Torres," he said. "FBI Financial Crimes." "Can I have 5 minutes?" I felt my whole body go cold. I said I was working. "This won't take long," he said. He wasn't unkind about it. He was just certain, the way certain people are certain. "We know you've been spending time with Sullivan Carter. We'd like to talk to you about that." He didn't want much. That was how he framed it. Just a conversation. Background. Context. He had questions about Carter Meridian's commercial lending practices, about certain construction contracts, about whether I'd ever heard Carter mention specific names or companies. He had a card. He pushed it across the table. "We can also help you," he said, "if things get complicated." Whatever that looks like. I picked up the card. I told him I'd think about it. I went back to the kitchen and stood next to the prep counter for 5 full minutes, breathing slowly, the way the therapist I couldn't afford anymore had taught me, until my hands stopped shaking. I didn't tell Sullivan Carter that night. I told myself I needed time to think. I told myself it was nothing. I put Agent Torres's card in my jacket pocket and drove home and sat on the edge of Rosie's bed, watching her breathe until I felt human again. 3 days later, the black Suburban was waiting outside my building in the morning, not the driver. Sullivan Carter himself in the back seat, the door open. "Get in," he said. "Quiet, even. We need to talk." I got in. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or the understanding that there was no version of not getting in that ended better. He knew about Agent Torres. Of course he did. His office was 42 floors up. The door locked behind me with that quiet final click, and he stood behind his desk and looked at me the way he always looked at me, like he was waiting to see what I was going to do, and said, "Tell me the truth, Marin. All of it." And I did. I told him about the bar, the badge, the card, the questions Torres had asked. I told him I hadn't answered any of them. I told him I was scared. Of Torres, of what I'd stumbled into, of the locked door and the 42 stories of glass between me and the ground. He listened without moving. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You should have told me immediately," he said. "I know," I said. "Why didn't you?" I looked at him. I thought about how to say this. "Because I needed to decide if I was going to," I said. I needed to decide who I was in this. Something shifted in his face, just slightly. A softening I wasn't expecting. "And?" he said. "And I'm here," I said. "Telling you, that should answer your question." He came around the desk and stood in front of me, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. Then he reached out and touched my face, one hand, brief, careful, and said, "Torres isn't interested in you. He's interested in what you might know. He'll come back." "I know," I said again. "What he told you about me," Sullivan said. "Some of it is true." I waited. "Carter Meridian was not a clean operation when my father ran it," he said. He sat on the edge of the desk, arms crossed, and said it the way you say something you've rehearsed and decided to stop rehearsing. Construction contracts that were steered, labor disputes that were resolved in ways I prefer not to describe in detail. My father ran the city a certain way. I inherited that infrastructure. "And what did you do with it?" I asked. "I've spent 4 years trying to dismantle it," he said. "Slowly, carefully. Because if you pull the wrong thread, people get hurt." He looked at me. "Not everyone agrees with my approach, including some people inside my own organization." That was when I understood why the FBI was circling, not because Sullivan Carter was expanding the operation, because he was closing it down, and closing it down created instability, and instability created informants, and informants created federal attention. "You're more vulnerable right now than you've been in years," I said. He looked at me steadily. "Yes, and Torres thinks I'm leverage. He thinks you're useful," Sullivan said. "There's a difference. He doesn't know what you are to me." I held his gaze. "What am I to you?" He was quiet for a moment. The city glittered behind him, 42 floors of ordinary Thursday. "The only thing in 4 years that's made any of this feel worth fixing," he said. I sat down. My legs needed a break from holding me up. "Tell me the rest," I said. "If we're doing this, whatever this is, I need to know everything. The real version, not the version that protects me from information." He told me. It took 2 hours and 2 glasses of water, and a conversation about his father that made the muscles in his jaw kite in a way that didn't ease for a long time. His father, Robert Carter, had built Carter Meridian into one of the dominant commercial real estate forces in Chicago through relationships with people who didn't file taxes and contracts that were designed to be misread. When Robert died of a heart attack 5 years ago, Sullivan had inherited not just a company but a system, a web of obligations and alliances and implicit threats that couldn't be unwound overnight without consequences. "The men Torres is asking about," Sullivan said, "the ones connected to the lending division, those are my father's people. I've been systematically moving them out of positions of influence, rerouting the money into legitimate channels. Some of them aren't happy about it." "Are they dangerous?" I asked. "To me, no," he said. "They know better. To someone near me who they might think they could use?" He paused. "That's what I'm careful about. That's why you handled Danny," I said. He looked at me. He was making noise to people he shouldn't have been talking to. Men who knew my name. Men who thought he might be a useful way to reach you, to reach me. His voice was flat and careful. I handled it before it became something that required a different kind of handling. I thought about that, about how close it had come to something worse, and how I hadn't even known. "Is Rosie safe?" I asked. "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "She is the thing I am most certain of. No one would be foolish enough." I believed him. We sat in that office for another hour. He answered every question I asked, about the remaining operations, about the timeline for full legitimization, about the federal case and how exposed he actually was. He didn't soften anything. He didn't manage me. He just told me the truth, and I sat with it, and when I was done sitting with it, I said, "What does Torres actually have?" "Circumstantial evidence of things that happened under my father's watch," he said. "Nothing that puts me in the room. He needs someone to fill in gaps he can't prove." "He needs me to fill them," I said. "He needs you to believe he's on your side so you'll fill them," Sullivan said. "The distinction matters." I turned Agent Torres's card over in my fingers. I'd been carrying it for 3 days. "What would you do," I said slowly, "if I wore a wire? If I decided Torres was the safer bet?" He studied me for a long time. "I'd let you," he said finally. "If that's what you decided you needed to do to feel safe, I wouldn't stop you." I stared at him. "That's not the answer I expected." "I know." He leaned forward. "But I'm not going to threaten you, Marin. I'm not going to make your choice for you. I already made that mistake once with Danny, and you called me on it, and you were right." I exhaled. Something I'd been holding for 3 days. "I'm not going to wear a wire," I said. "I'm also not going to pretend I'm not scared." "You should be scared," he said. "You're smart enough to be scared of this. The question is whether you're willing to be scared and stay anyway." I looked at my hands. I thought about Rosie at the Arts Center on Monday, coming home with her hands smelling like rosin and her eyes full of whatever 5-year-olds look like when they've discovered something they love. "What does staying mean?" I said. "Actually mean. In your life, in this situation." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and walked to the window and looked at Chicago the way people look at things they built. "It means I don't hide things from you," he said. "It means you have access to the full picture, not the version I decide you can handle. It means Rosie is safe. Not because I say so, but because I make it structurally true." He turned. "And it means this stops being something that happens to you and becomes something we navigate together." "Partners," I said. "If that's the word you want. It's the only word I'll accept," I said. "I won't be managed. I won't be kept in a comfortable box while you make decisions about our lives. If I'm in, I'm in. That means I have a voice." He looked at me for a long time. "That's going to be an adjustment for me," he said, and somehow the honesty of it was better than a promise. "I know," I said. "I stayed that night, not in the way you might assume. I went home to Rosie, put her to bed, made the risotto she'd requested, badly still, but improving, and sat at my kitchen table long after she was asleep, making a list. It was the kind of list you make when you need to see your own thoughts in order, reasons to walk away, reasons to stay. The walking away list was logical. The staying list was shorter and made less sense on paper and felt more true. I called him at 11. "I'm in," I said. "I know," he said. "You didn't know," I said. "No," he admitted, "but I hoped. The months that followed were not simple. I won't pretend they were." Agent Torres came back twice more. Both times I met with him briefly, said I had nothing useful, and went home. Sullivan knew about both visits within the hour. He never told me how. I stopped asking. There were nights Sullivan came home late. He'd given me a key to the Lincoln Park house by then, a brownstone that felt like a home rather than a statement, with a tension in his shoulders that meant something had gone sideways. He didn't always tell me what. I didn't always ask. We were still working out the edges of what partnership looked like, when one partner's business sometimes required information the other partner was safer not having. We fought about it exactly once, badly, and then we figured out a version that worked. I knew the shape of everything, the architecture of what he was building and dismantling, and I trusted him to tell me when the specifics would put me at risk. It was imperfect. It was ours. Rosie, meanwhile, decided Sullivan was the best person she'd ever met, largely because he knew the name of every dinosaur she mentioned and never once told her the information was impressive for a 5-year-old, just answered as if it were perfectly normal to discuss ankylosaur defensive adaptations over breakfast. She called him Sully before I did. Children have very little patience for formality. 8 months after that night in his office, Carter Meridian Group announced a partnership with the Chicago Community Development Corporation to fund workforce housing across 4 South Side neighborhoods. The announcement ran in the Tribune and 2 financial publications. Sullivan did not do press. He let the numbers speak. 3 weeks after that, the federal case against Carter Meridian quietly collapsed. Torres got transferred. I didn't ask the details. What I do know is that on a Sunday morning in April, with Rosie upstairs trying to teach herself a Beethoven piece one measure at a time, loudly, repeatedly, without complaint, Sullivan sat across from me at the kitchen table with his hands around a coffee mug and said, without looking up, "I need to ask you something." I looked at him. Something in my chest went very still. He reached into his jacket pocket and set a small box on the table between us. He didn't open it. He just left it there and finally looked at me. "I am not an easy person," he said. "I'm working on it. I've been working on it since before you, but I'm working harder now, and I expect that's obvious, and I also expect it will always be a project and not something that gets finished." He paused. "You've never pretended otherwise. I've tried not to, either." He pushed the box across the table. "Maren Ellis," he said, "will you marry me?" Knowing everything, the whole picture. I opened the box. The ring was simple. He'd known better than to be extravagant about this. Upstairs, Rosie hit the same 3 notes again, got the sequence right this time and played on. "Yes," I said. He let out a breath. Just one, quiet, like he'd been holding it for a while. "Can I ask you one more thing?" he said. I waited. "Rosie," he said, "if she wanted to, I'd like to be her father. Legally, officially, if she wants that." I looked at this man, complicated, careful, still in the middle of becoming whoever he was going to be, and I thought about everything it had cost both of us to get to this table, this Sunday, this question. "Ask her yourself," I said. "She'll tell you what she wants. She always does." He nodded. He looked almost nervous, which was new. I stored it away. We went upstairs together. Rosie was at the small keyboard. Sullivan had moved to her room 3 months ago, her feet not quite reaching the floor, the Beethoven finally, stubbornly, starting to resolve itself into something recognizable. She looked up when we came in. Her eyes went to Sullivan first, then to me, then to the ring, with the precise attention of a child who misses nothing. "Are you getting married?" she said. "We're talking about it," Sullivan said. "Do I get to be in it?" she said. "If you want," he said. "And also," he crouched down to her level, "I'd like to be your dad, if you want that too. Not in a replacing anyone way. Just, if you want that." Rosie considered this with the gravity she gave most important questions. She pulled her hands off the keys and put them in her lap. "Sully," she said, "you already are." He looked at her for a moment. The expression on his face was one I had never seen before, and I knew I would spend the rest of my life grateful I was in the room when it happened. I put my hand on his shoulder. He reached up and covered it with his. Outside, April was doing whatever April does in Chicago. 55 degrees and trying its best. Rosie turned back to the keyboard and played the 3 notes again. Cleaner this time. None of it was what I'd planned. None of it was what I would have chosen if you'd handed me a list of options at 28, exhausted and struggling and fine with it. But there is a version of a life that gets built from the wreckage of the one you thought you were going to have, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it turns out to be better than anything you could have drawn up on purpose. I believe that now. I'm still learning to believe it. Some days are easier than others. But on the good days, I sit at the kitchen table in the Lincoln Park brownstone and listen to Rosie play Beethoven one measure at a time, and Sullivan Carter, my partner, my impossible, complicated, genuinely trying partner, makes coffee without being asked, and the city does its ordinary thing outside the window, and I think, I chose this. With all the information, with both eyes open, I chose it. That's the part that matters most. That I chose it freely, and I'd choose it again.